Hi guys, so former Prime Minister and staunch unionist Gordon Brown was interviewed on BBC Radio 4 following the Holyrood elections, where the SNP and the Greens increased their vote. Once again, they're forming a coalition, a majority in Holyrood, which represents pro-independence parties, and Nicola Sturgeon is planning to call for a second referendum. Now, Gordon Brown was a senior figure back in 2014 when he and other senior political figures went to Scotland to convince the people to vote to remain in the Union, not for independence. And he's back once again to convince the Scottish people that independence is the wrong way to go and staying in the Union is the right way to go. But one of his arguments collapses because it relies on Boris Johnson. So let's hear what he had to say.
Do you agree that the Scottish Government, the SNP-led Scottish Government, do now have a mandate for another referendum?
Well, actually, what Nicola Sturgeon said yesterday is there is to be no immediate referendum. And I think what you said on television last night is there's no likelihood of a referendum for some time because we're trying to sort out COVID and the economy. So you've got to use the time to do three things. Can you make the United Kingdom work better? Can its decision-making process work better? And you need a review of the whole constitution. Can we respond to what we found in our poll, which I'm publishing today? 73% of Scots want to cooperate better with the United Kingdom.
Okay, 73% of Scots want to cooperate better with the United Kingdom. But I think if you were to poll people in the Republic of Ireland, should we cooperate better with the UK? I think a huge majority would say yes. If you go to people in the UK and ask, should the UK cooperate better with countries around the world, they would say yes. So this survey doesn't really present anything that could be used against independence. It's important to differentiate between independence and working with your neighbours.
Can we find a way of doing this? And thirdly, because the big issue is not the referendum, the big issue is independence. Can we find a way of explaining to people the facts about what independence means? And I would challenge Nicola Sturgeon. She's had years to think about this. Tell us what independence means, the benefits, and tell us the costs. Tell us about the pound, tell us about the pension, tell us about the border, tell us about quantitative easing. None of these questions have been answered. And every time you ask her, she says she's going to produce a plan sometime. We actually should have answered these questions by now.
Well, that's what the SNP will be working on because, as you say, it's not likely that there's going to be another actual vote for a couple of years. They'll concentrate on making their case for independence, but the other side of the argument need to put forward a positive view of the United Kingdom. Throughout this election, we heard parties that want to keep the United Kingdom together arguing against independence, against having another referendum, but not putting forward a positive view of the UK.
That's exactly what we're going to do.
That's exactly what we're going to do. So he's just before he criticised Nicola Sturgeon for not presenting arguments in favour of independence. And he also criticised her for having years to do that. And then when he was asked, well, can you present an argument in favour of the union? His response is, we're working on that. So he's being hypocritical here. But Nicola Sturgeon has said that for the first 100 days of this new parliament, they're going to focus on rebuilding. They're going to focus on the pandemic. They're not going to focus on independence. So you can't criticize her for not focusing on the pandemic and rebuilding if that's what she's promised to do.
We've set up a group called Our Scottish Future. We're asking people to join us. Is to put the positive, the patriotic and the principled case for the union. I don't want to run on any negative case. You see, what's happened in Scotland is people assume from London it's 50-50, 50 hell-bent on independence, 50% dyed-in-the-wool unionists. That's not the Scotland I see. The middle Scotland, that's about 40% of Scots. They're certainly more Scottish than British. They prefer Nicola Sturgeon, obviously, to Boris Johnson. But they actually want cooperation between Scotland and the rest of the UK on.
Yes, they want cooperation, but that's different from independence. As I said before, many countries around the world want to cooperate with their neighbours. Some perhaps don't, but generally countries want to cooperate with their neighbours. So asking the Scottish people, even members of the SNP, even the hardline independence people would say, yes, we want to cooperate with England Yes, we want to cooperate with Northern Ireland. Yes, we want to cooperate with Wales because they're our neighbours. In an independent Scotland, we of course would want to cooperate with them. Now, there may be some members of the SNP or the independence movement that want to turn Scotland into a hermit nation, but I think they represent a very small minority. Even Brexiteers will say, yes, we want to cooperate with the European Union. But that doesn't mean that we want to rejoin the European Union. In the same way that cooperating with England does not mean that you're a unionist.
Health, they want it on the climate change, they want it on jobs and the economy. And of course, they want Scotland and the UK to find a way of working better together. Now, I think it means four things, if I may say so. A more inclusive centre, so Boris Johnson's got to change.
This is where the entire thing collapses. Boris Johnson needs to change. I'm sorry, Boris Johnson is not going to change. Boris Johnson doesn't give two hoots about Scotland. He doesn't give two hoots about the Union. Boris Johnson cares only about one thing. And you probably know what the answer to that is. Boris Johnson. Okay. Boris Johnson's not going to change. Now, you're in no position to convince him to change, even if he were to change, because you don't hold a majority in the House of Commons. Boris Johnson has an 80, or is it 81 seat now, majority in the House of Commons. So you're in no position to force him. You can beg him, you can plead with him, you can try and bribe him, but he's not going to change.
Better relations, so you've got to have a permanent forum between the regions and the nations and the centre of government, which Boris Johnson should chair. And
you're asking Boris Johnson to be a leader. Boris Johnson is not a leader. I think Gordon Brown is really barking up the wrong tree here.
You need to look at the powers that are relevant post-Brexit for the parliaments. Now, all these things can be looked at in the next few months, and Boris Johnson should set up the Commission of Inquiry. He should look at a permanent forum for cooperation, not these one-off meetings that come out of panic.
But this is Boris Johnson's style, is doing everything at the last minute. Oh, there's something wrong, let's have a quick meeting. There's no planning. There's no cooperation. This is Boris Johnson to a T. And you're expecting Boris Johnson to be the one to lead the charge for the Union? Boris Johnson, who's afraid to go to Scotland? Boris Johnson, who has to be smuggled into Scotland under the cover of darkness and smuggled out? This is the guy that you want to lead the charge to defend the Union? I really think Gordon Brown is grasping at straws here.
And he should look for how we can actually cooperate better. And the health service is a great example.
But there's no reason to assume Boris Johnson is going to do any of those things. You can put forward any thoughts you like about rearranging the Constitution, giving more powers to the Scottish Parliament, or how the UK government ought to work with the Scottish government.
Sorry to interrupt once again, but more powers to the Scottish Parliament. A big problem here with that argument is that the Tories consistently have voted against the idea of extending powers to the Scottish Parliament. If you don't believe me, look at the voting records. Look at the voting record of your local Tory MP, or if you don't have a local Tory MP, choose a random Tory MP. Look at their voting record and you'll see that they vote consistently against extending powers to the Scottish Parliament. What makes anyone think that the Tories would now turn around and extend powers to the Scottish Parliament? They may attempt to throw them a bone, a few days before the election. Boris Johnson will make a promise, whatever that's worth. But at that stage, I think it's too late. That's not a way to run a campaign to defend the Union.
But the truth is, the Labour Party, even if it is looking at this, is not in a position to implement any of this. It's too late. The argument is now between Nicola Sturgeon's vision of an independent Scotland and Boris Johnson's position on the UK.
You've already said it's not too late. You said it last night on television that there's going to be months, perhaps even a year or two before this comes up in any real sense. We've got a funny war.
Oh, it's not too late to make a case for the Union, but it's too late for the government to institute any of your Labour ideas.
Look, Boris Johnson will change his mind on this.
Really, I think Gordon Brown has lost it, because Boris Johnson's not going to change his mind on the Union. Boris Johnson may set up a commission. He may set up some body to deal with this, to promote the Union. But he's not going to lead the charge. He's not passionate about the union. He's only passionate about Boris Johnson. You have the wrong guy in charge. David Cameron would have been a better choice. Even Theresa May would have been better. Boris Johnson doesn't care about the union. He doesn't care about Scotland. I think at this stage, Gordon Brown should just say, look, it's lost. Or at least there's no point supporting Boris Johnson because he's not enthusiastically supportive of the union.
Muscular unionism, that's an attempt to sort of put Britishness into Scotland. That's not going to work very well. Project Fear will not work. Scottish people are very proud indeed. But what he'll come to realise is what I'm suggesting. He will set up a review on the future of the United Kingdom. There'll be a constitutional review like Brandon 50 years ago. He will set up a permanent forum, in my view, of consultation between the nations, the regions and the centre. And he will strive in the end for better cooperation. Now, whether he does it too late, I don't know. But these are the decisions that the government will make in the end. That's the patriotic, positive and principled case. And I do urge all Scots who believe in this, because we are more Scottish than British in most cases. People would choose Scotland as against Britain if they had a choice. But people don't want to make that choice. They actually want more cooperation.
But they're going to be asked to make
for living
that choice.
standards and for the health service and everything else.
That choice is coming. Nicola Sturgeon is going to pass legislation to allow for another referendum. There will be some kind of showdown with the UK government. Now, the Scottish Labour's position has been simply to say we don't want a referendum within the next 5 years, within the lifetime of the next Parliament. But this argument is coming and Labour will have to take a side. And the question is, do they line up with the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament, who have a majority in favour of a referendum, or do they take sides with Boris Johnson saying he doesn't want to allow it to happen? That is a very difficult choice for the Labour Party.
It is a very difficult choice, the idea that you would side with Boris Johnson. Because Boris Johnson is not very popular with Labour supporters and Labour voters. He's popular with some people, but he's not popular with especially Labour voters in Scotland. So it's going to be very difficult to convince people who normally vote for the Labour Party to back Boris Johnson when it comes to defending the union. Now, some people will, of course, hold their nose and vote against the SNP and the Greens or whatever they have put forward for a referendum. It'll be very difficult for many people to say, look, I'm going to support Boris Johnson over Scotland.
That's not the choice. The choice is what are the options available to the future for the future of this country. One is independence. One is the status quo. One is changing the status quo. I don't think you'll find a referendum is fought on the status quo anymore because people realise it's got to change.
What are you talking about? All referendums are on the status quo or changing or in this case independence. There won't be a vote on the ballot. Do you want the status quo? Do you want to change the status quo? Or do you want independence? That's not how it works. Surely Gordon Brown understands that. I understand what he's trying to say here. He's trying to say that, it's not going to be a referendum between voting for independence and staying the same as we are. What we're going to try and sell people is the idea that you have a vote on independence or some better Scotland, better than what you have at the moment.
And I think you're underestimating the pressure that's going to come from Scotland for Boris Johnson to abandon this policy of muscular unionists, get people round the table and talk. That's the only way. This cannot be solved in the courts. The courts can tell you what you can't do. They can't tell you what you should do. And this will have to be resolved by people getting round the table at some point. Nicola Sturgeon knows. I would ask Nicola Sturgeon this morning, will she commission and publish the legal advice of her Lord Advocate, of all the law officers, which will tell her that she's in danger of trying to have a Catalonian and wildcat-style referendum when the legal advice is very clear. If she wants to be honest with the Scottish people, she should not only publish that legal advice, she should publish all the information and the facts and the figures about independence so that people will have all the facts in front of them if they ever have to make that choice.
Now, Nicola Sturgeon has been very clear. She has no intention of having a wildcat Catalonia-style referendum, that she is only interested in one that is legally solid. But let me ask you...
But that raises a question, does it not, Sarah? She's got to publish her legal advice. Is she entitled at the moment?
This is an argument that will come once they've passed the legislation to allow for a referendum. Let me ask you...
Once again, Gordon Brown has said we shouldn't be focusing on the referendum. And now he's talking about, well, what about the legal aspects of the referendum? Why hasn't she published this and that? This and the other, or whatever. But if they haven't brought forward the legislation for a referendum in the Scottish Parliament, then there's no point talking about whether it's legal or not. First, you have to see the legislation, and then it can be challenged.
One question about the UK Labour Party.
Looking
at the position, we need to concentrate on the wider question.
Legal advice now.
Let me ask you, though, when you're looking across the UK at the position the Labour Party's in, do you see the challenge of electability greater now than that you were facing in the 80s and 90s?
It's a great challenge because, Sarah, we're facing seismic changes right across the Western world, America, Europe, Britain, economic dislocation greater than ever before, widening social inequalities. And you've got Brexit nationalism, Scottish nationalism, Welsh, Irish, Ulster nationalism. And Keir Starmer and his leadership have got to deal with all these changes. So the Labour Party's got to change. We can never have the same policies as 1997. They can't be the same policies as 2019. He has got to be given the space and the power and the leaders working with him to change the Labour Party so that it can deal with these fundamental challenges that have been aggravated by COVID, that any Western Social Democratic Party has got to deal with.
I'm terribly sorry.
Okay, and then the interview ends. But if Gordon Brown's position is we need to rely on Boris Johnson to lead the charge to defend the union, then the union is in a very bad state. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?